Let Navy Federal Credit Union help you rebalance your priorities and take back control of credit card debt with their balance transfer offer. You'll save more with the low intro APR when you transfer your credit card balance from another lender to a Navy Federal credit card. Plus, with no balance transfer fees, you can choose the card that fits your lifestyle and be on your way to doing away with high-interest credit card debt. 5.99 to 18% variable APRs based on product types and credit worthiness. Up to $1 cash advance. Transaction fees at non-Navy Federal ATMs. Check out NavyFederal.org for more information. Navy Federal is federally insured by NCUA. Folks, welcome to Military Matters. I'm Rod Rodriguez, and I am recording this shortly after the events in D.C., the siege of the Capitol building. And I knew right away that I wanted to talk with one of our previous guests, Kevin Carroll. And I'm going to let Kevin talk you through a little bit about his background. And I think it's extremely important that we understand who Kevin Carroll is, because that's going to lend gravity. That's going to help you understand his experience and the frame, the lens through which he is seeing today's events unfold. Kevin, tell us a little bit about yourself and your experience, please.
Rod, thanks so much for having me on what's a terribly sad day for America. I previously served as senior counsel to Secretary of Homeland Security John Kelly and as senior counsel to former House Homeland Security Committee Chairman Peter King. And before that, I was a CIA officer and an Army officer. I had a chance to serve, as I know many of your listeners have, places like Bosnia, Afghanistan, Iraq, and Yemen. I'm not speaking here today for the Army or the agency, but I'm eager to speak with you and your listeners.
Kevin, take us through what has happened today. A lot of folks are seeing this event through a couple of different lenses themselves. Everybody has their own experience. What has happened as far as you're concerned? What have you seen happen today?
So I view what's going on right now as an ongoing attempted coup d'etat. The Constitution calls for the Congress to meet today with the Vice President and to ratify the results of the Electoral College. That constitutional act was stopped by force. The President and his counsel, Rudy Giuliani, encouraged a mob to storm the Capitol. They stormed onto the floor of the House. They stormed onto the floor of the Senate. Weapons were brought. Blood was shed. And they've had to flee the Capitol. So it is sedition, and it is a attempted overthrow of the United States government by force.
Those are very strong words, sedition. That is a very strong accusation against the government, against those currently in power. I don't know enough about the law. You are the lawyer. I don't know what counts as sedition. Can you tell me a little bit about what is sedition and what constitutes that act?
So there are things that can be seditious without even rising to the level of what happened today. I mean, today you had an armed, violent takeover of the legislature to keep it from meeting. So there's a specific statute about violently plotting to overthrow the government. There's also a statute about what's called misprision of treason, realizing that someone is plotting against the Constitution, is plotting to overthrow the government. And if you're an officer of the United States, you have a duty to report that to someone. So what we've seen today is the most serious threat to the constitutional order since the Civil War.
There are some that are saying that what happened today was justified, that the Constitution, that the office of the presidency was being usurped by a false election result, that Trump actually won by a landslide, and that what they did today was justified. That was government property. We pay taxes. They have a right to go in and interrupt these proceedings.
Yeah, people who think or say those things aren't fit to be citizens in a republic. We have elections, we have laws, legislatures and courts, for the matter, need to be allowed to meet in peace and not be overrun by people carrying semi-automatic weapons. The Trump campaign has had opportunities in front of 60 courts, and including appellate judges, over 90 judges, many of them Republican appointees, some of them Trump appointees, and no evidence has been adduced that there was large-scale fraud in this election, sufficient to change the result. So, some things in life are relative, and some things, you can have an opinion on, whether you like Coke or Pepsi or the Mets or the Yankees. This is a straight up factual matter that Joe Biden won the election, and people using violence to keep that from happening are, and I use this word cautiously, but deliberately, un-American.
One of the things we saw during today's violence that erupted at the Capitol building was a prolonged period of silence from the White House. These folks were breaking down doors. There are Twitter images of folks walking out with souvenirs, so to say. Another way to see that, another word for that is looting. I will talk about the double standard here in a moment, but what I really want to talk about here is the White House silence. What do you take from that silence? Why didn't we hear from the president?
So my belief is that at present, he's mentally incapable of serving as president of the United States, and that the cabinet should immediately invoke the 25th Amendment, under which Vice President Pence would take over. The president would have a chance to challenge their determination that he was unfit, although likely the clock would expire on his presidency before that was adjudicated on January 20th. I have met a couple times with President Trump, and I had the impression then that he was an unwell man. And I think what we saw today was absolutely the action, or as you're pointing out, the inaction of an unwell man.
Shortly after, I believe, this young woman who was shot in the neck, she just passed away. Our condolences to her family. I don't care what your political leanings are. When a person dies, this is always a tragic event. She passed away. She was shot in the neck. Shortly after that, I believe the president did make some statements. What did you make of the president's statements?
So I share your sentiment that the death of any civilian, the death of any American is always to be regretted, and pray for the repose of her soul. It's very legally significant that she died, because the people that incited this riot, this act of domestic terrorism, are now guilty of felony murder. And that includes President Trump, and it includes his lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, who called for the election to be decided by trial by combat, which is a medieval thing where you and I fight, and God will make sure that the right person wins. It's craziness. And the president's silence was basically encouraging what was going on. And it's just an absolute abdication of his responsibility as the president of the United States, because he was enjoying seeing these thugs, these domestic terrorists, tearing down the American flag and raising the Trump flag over the Capitol. Sickening.
One of the things that I noticed about those statements that the president made, they typically, what you want to hear during those situations is a president or a leader who's telling folks that basically stop right now. What you're doing is wrong. Go home. What I got out of this message was a lot of the president maintained his position. He reiterated the vote was a fraudulent vote, that he won by landslide. He repeated that several times, but then prefaced it, then kind of like not prefaced it, but definitely kind of tempered that with, but what you're doing is wrong. Go home. But also, we did win. Don't give up. These people are evil, but please go home. Stop being violent. It felt like one message out of one side, one message out of the other. That was the way I interpreted it. That's the kind of the way that it sounded to me. Am I off? Did you hear something different?
No, it was a grossly insufficient and inappropriate statement. And I saw this in the administration, and it's just happened again and again during this presidency. Something terrible will happen, and the White House staff and the cabinet will beg and plead for the president to make the sort of normal statement that a president would make. And he'll sort of mumble the part that he's supposed to say, and then go off on one of his tangents. I'll give you an example. After neo-Nazis killed a woman in Charlottesville, the president was asked to denounce the fact that there'd been a neo-Nazi rally in the United States where a person had been killed. And he sort of said, "Oh, I decry the violence, but there's very good people on both sides." He can never stick to the ordinary decent sentiment that any of us would make. And again, all of us, we know there's a certain way to behave in church. We know there's a certain thing that you say or you don't say at a wake or a funeral or something like that. And this is a person who I think has serious emotional and psychological problems and is just unable to do the basic things and say the normal things that any responsible adult would.
Now, I know that our listeners come from different backgrounds, different political leanings. I have several friends myself from all sides of the spectrum, libertarians, Democrats and Republicans. But it seems that there is now a new player in town, and these are Trumpists. These are folks that follow and have an allegiance to President Trump, not necessarily the Republican Party. And I say that because most of my friends who are Republicans, they are equally disgusted with this. They feel that this has gone too far, that this is inciting violence, that the silence and the invocation of, come down here and show people what you've got, that kind of that tough guy rhetoric has its own unique universe now. It's got its own spectrum, and these are Trumpists. How do you see that playing out in the next couple of years as we enter this new era of a Trumpist style political spectrum?
I agree with you. And, what we saw today, was not conservatism. What we saw today was not republicanism as anyone would have ever understood it. I mean, the Republican Party, after all, it was founded against slavery and saved the Union. And today we had the Confederate flag being flown inside the Capitol. It's an emblem of treason. There's a word for what happened today. There's a couple words. One of them, as you said, is Trumpism. Another word is fascism. When a right-wing white nationalist movement uses force to try to reverse the result of an election that they didn't like, it's fascism. Like the Nazis, like Franco, like the Japanese.
More after the break. Are you carrying a credit card balance after the holidays? Trust me, we've all been there. Let Navy Federal Credit Union help you rebalance your priorities in 2021 with their balance transfer offer. You'll save more with a low intro APR when you transfer your balance from another lender to a Navy Federal credit card. Plus, with no balance transfer fees, you can choose the card that fits your lifestyle and be on your way to doing away with high-interest credit card debt. You can even manage your balance transfer safely and securely through the Navy Federal mobile app or online. 2020 came with a lot of unpredictability, and if you're looking to save more and take back control in this new year, transferring your balance to a Navy Federal credit card is a great first step. 5.99 to 80% variable APRs based on product types and credit worthiness. Up to $1 cash advance transaction fees at non-Navy Federal ATMs. Message and data rates may apply. Visit NavyFederal.org for more information. Navy Federal is federally insured by NCUA. Now, I will say that some of the folks that were there, I spoke to. I actually had some friends of mine that were there on the scene. I talked with them. We went Facebook Live, and they were showing me around what had happened. And these are people of color. These are people who are from other countries. Even one of them is a very respected Iraqi American citizen who was there to witness, as he said, to witness the event. But I also have some African American friends who are, in the media industry, in the music industry, that were there as well. I'm hesitant to call this movement white nationalism. I'm hesitant to call that a number of things. For one, it feels like we are kind of pigeonholing somebody who supports the president. I don't necessarily agree with that, but I would say there is a faction inside of this inside of this movement. I'm not going to call them an organization. They're definitely not organized yet. And I will say yet, but there is definitely a faction inside that does have some racial motivations. How is this all happening, though? How does this work in that there are so many people, there are so many different ideologies that work inside of this Trump support movement? How are they coalescing? How is there any type of synergy inside of an organization, inside of a movement like that?
And you're right. I mean, there are people of many different backgrounds that support the president. And I think it's become like a cult of personality at this point. There are people who, for whatever reason, intensely identify with the president more than any particular policy. And there's very many examples of this. But I remember, again, at the time being inside the administration, Trump threatening fire and fury and nuclear war against North Korea. And me thinking, oh boy, I don't like the North Koreans very much, but I'm not sure if we want to start a nuclear war either. And people would defend the president vociferously. And then the president said Kim Jong-il was a wonderful guy and they'd fallen in love. I said, well, he's a bloody communist dictator. I don't think he's a very lovable fellow. They'd say, oh, no, he's terrific. They'll change 180 degrees if the president changes 180 degrees. So it's the sort of Trump supporters that assaulted police and desecrated the U.S. Capitol today are really, more in common with members of like the Thuggee cult in India in the 19th century or the Jonestown cult, from the 1970s than a organized political party founded by Abraham Lincoln.
Are you at all concerned about the rhetoric that you're using to describe some of these folks? These people really do feel pretty passionately about their position. Some folks might say that you're taking a really harsh slant against folks who have different political beliefs than you. Where do you draw the line between somebody with differing beliefs than you and somebody who's un-American?
I draw the line when they violently occupy the Congress and chase our elected representatives off the floor. People can think pretty much whatever they want. But if you start shutting down the legislature, if you start shutting down the courts, if you start using violence against government officials, I just have no respect for your opinion and nothing in common with you whatsoever. And if you're directly involved in it, you belong in prison.
It took a while for the White House to approve additional National Guard members. The president is essentially, if this got really out of control, the president is the one who's charged with the responsibility of calling in active duty troops, just like they did during the George Floyd riot/protest that occurred in D.C. There was a time 82nd was staged out of Fort Belvoir. They were ready to go on the president's signal. What we noticed today was an abundance of silence. He did not say anything. He did not necessarily act as the Capitol was being stormed. Does this situation, does this demonstration of action or inaction, is this a wake-up call? Is this a signal to the American voters, to Congress, to our Supreme Court, that there might be a problem with our executive branch and how much power it can wield?
So there was a fascinating statement put out by the Pentagon tonight in which the acting Secretary of Defense Miller and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Milley, said that they were in consultations with Vice President Pence and the cabinet, not with President Trump, even though he is the Commander-in-Chief of the United States Armed Forces. So there's really no legal way to divest the president of his authority as Commander-in-Chief of the United States Armed Forces, other than by the 25th Amendment or impeachment, conviction, and removal. And as you know, there's certain things that the military can't do unless the president orders them to do it. Again, I think the situation is appropriate for invoking the 25th Amendment or even beginning impeachment proceedings, even with just 2 weeks left. I'll give you one historical example, though, which just shows what uncharted or rare territory we're in. In the days before Richard Nixon resigned, he was drinking extremely heavily and started muttering darkly about how he could kill tens of millions of people in 30 minutes with a nuclear strike, really terrifying people. And the Secretary of Defense and the Secretary of State told the National Military Command Center not to obey any orders to use force from the President of the United States unless they sort of countersign them. And Secretary of Defense Schlesinger had absolutely no legal authority to do that. But it was also obviously a good idea. You would not want a drunken Richard Nixon starting World War III. So it'd be very interesting to know exactly what's going on right now in the conversations between Acting Secretary of Defense Miller and Vice President Pence and the cabinet. And I think that they might involve the 25th Amendment.
It's interesting that you mentioned that, because my next question really has to do with some what ifs. And, before today, I would have, and I think you would agree with me, that some of these questions would have been like, well, come on, that's really far left, that there's left field. There's no way that would be unprecedented. But today, it feels like everything's on the table now. Everything is an option. Everything is possible now. The president has said very firmly that he won the election. He believes he won this election. Can the president use the military to stay in office? Can he use the military, surround this White House, or not allow President Biden or President-elect Biden or Joe Biden, whatever his official title is, can he use the military and say, no, I'm not, I am the legitimate winner. This was a false election.
He may not legally do it. And if he attempts to, it's an illegal order, which everyone in the military knows they're bound not only to disobey, but to affirmatively report to Congress, to inspectors general, to law enforcement, to the courts. A relevant statute here is posse comitatus. And posse comitatus was passed really as part of the settlement of the 1876 election, where the Union Army had a considerable role in helping with elections in the South after the Civil War, and protecting the rights of African Americans to vote, for example. And the settlement of the 1876 election included the passage of posse comitatus, which stopped the Army from doing that, which was a tragedy in the case of the African American voters who then weren't allowed to vote in large numbers for another 90 years. But what posse comitatus does is it makes, unless waived by Congress, and it's not going to be waived by Congress here, it makes it a crime for a member of the United States Armed Forces to execute a search or a seizure within the meaning of the Fourth Amendment. So if the president ordered the military to use force, using force is a form of seizure to try to stay in office, it would just be a plainly illegal order, and the military would be duty and honor bound to disobey. And if they didn't, they'd be thrown in prison. Perfect.
We are in unprecedented territory, as it were. We are not saying, I am not saying, and neither is Kevin, that this is happening. I'm simply exploring some ideas that don't seem as crazy or far-fetched anymore. To Kevin's point, the Secretary of Defense and the Joint Chief of Staff are talking to the Vice President, not the President, according to that statement. My question, I suppose, is these back channels. Is that considered? Could we look at the Secretary of Defense and the Joint Chief and say, what you're doing is seditious? What you're doing is undermining the President of the United States?
Well, I mean, so the 25th Amendment was passed in the mid to late 1960s, after the assassination of President Kennedy, because one of the questions they reasonably asked was, what if, this is kind of ghoulish, but what if President Kennedy had been shot in the head and lived, and just been physically incapable of acting as president? So they set up a legal procedure for the cabinet and the vice president to discuss this. Legally speaking, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff is a statutory member of the National Security Council. He is not a member of the cabinet. So the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff would not have a vote in this. But the Secretary of Defense would have a vote along with any other member of the cabinet as to whether or not the president maintained his mental faculties. I believe, although I wasn't personally involved in them, that in May of 2017, the cabinet did discuss invoking the 25th Amendment, and that several cabinet members, however not a majority, were in favor of invoking it. So this is, it's a thing. It's out there.
Where do we go next, Kevin? Where does this country go next? How do we handle the next couple of days. Let's suppose that I don't think we're going to get the vote tonight. I don't think it's happening. It doesn't look that way. Suppose it doesn't. And tomorrow they meet at a location. Maybe they go back to the Capitol building, super guarded, or they meet on Fort Belvoir or any other military installation. The vote happens and Biden is ratified. He is the president-elect. You're coming in power in 2 weeks.
So President-elect Biden, I thought, gave brilliant remarks tonight. And I think he's really a man for the moment. I endorsed him and I voted for him. It's the first time I've voted, for a Democrat for president. I voted for Evan McMullen in 2016. But I think he's uniquely suited to the moment because he is such a genuine and sympathetic man, and I think does want to reach out to all Americans. So I think we're very lucky to have him coming in about 2 weeks to take the reins. But the next 2 weeks are going to be very dangerous. Obviously, there's going to have to be tremendous physical security concerns about the inauguration. Right? I mean, if in the light of what happened today, if we have, I mean, they canceled the inauguration ceremony in 1985 for Reagan's reelect because of extreme cold. It's going to be a very dangerous couple of weeks, and the country's in a bad place. And I think we all just have to agree with one another to obey the law.
There's a part of everybody, I think, that's thinking as soon as the inauguration takes place, we're out of the woods. I don't think that's true. I think that maybe this is just the beginning. This is only the beginning. What can happen next?
I think you're right. I mean, I think there are going to be demands which will be acceded to that President Trump face criminal liability for what happened today. And that's something I think before today, President-elect Biden was uninterested in, but I think is just going to happen. So yeah, there'll be criminal actions related to today. Also, there's going to be a reckoning with the members of the House and Senate that did this stunt today, and what happens to them politically. They took some very harsh measures around the time of the Civil War about members of the House and Senate that supported the Confederacy, and I could see some people seriously calling for people like Senator Cruz, House Minority Whip Steve Scalise, Congressman Paul Gosar, the people who were involved in this today, to be removed from the House and Senate for violating the rules of the Constitution.
Kevin, do you have any words for the American people? Do you have any words for our listeners as we wrap up this episode and we are wrapping up this day?
We're better than this. And all of us, except for the Native Americans, are all here from somewhere else because someone in our family's past thought that their descendants would be better off here than they were in Ireland, in my family's case. And I think we owe it to those who brought our families here. We owe it to those who fought for this country. And many of your listeners will have lost friends fighting for this country, as I have. And we owe it to them to preserve the republic. And we'll leave the legal decisions in the hands of the appropriate legal authorities. And we should all just commit to one another, to nonviolence, and to following the rule of law, and to praying for our country and for each other.
Kevin, thank you so much for your expertise, and I will say I know you have voiced and talked about your personal opinions on the president. I will say Military Matters does not have any dog in this fight, folks. The only thing I will say is that I do not condone violence. I do not condone the obstruction of justice. I do not condone the obstruction of the Constitution. I know some of you out there agree with what these folks did. I know some of you are sympathetic to those who stormed the Capitol. And I get it. I understand. I really do understand where they're coming from, where you're coming from. Some of these folks really do believe that the patriotic thing to do, the true unconstitutional action, was the ratification of Joe Biden as the president-elect. I get it. But there is a process. That process has to be exercised. And and going back to Kevin's point, 60 courts have not found any evidence to support election fraud. That would have to be a huge conspiracy of folks to try to do that. Has it happened before? Sure. There's been conspiracies. Have bad people gotten away with doing things? 100%. I'm not here to pass judgment. I'm here to let you pass judgment. You've heard Kevin, and you will go out, no doubt, and explore your social media. You'll go out there and explore your own facts. But I implore you, be safe, be kind. It goes back to what I said about, our actions during the George Floyd riot/protest. Be good to each other. Follow the law. And I don't know, man, just try to be good citizens. Try to be good humans. Don't go so far as to hurt other people for politics. Because you know what? Politics come and go, man. Lives are precious. So just, I don't know. Keep that in mind, folks. I'm Rod Rodriguez. That was Kevin Carroll. And you'll be hearing from my co-host, Jack Murphy, very, very soon. We're working on some amazing stories for you guys. And I'm very sorry that we had to interrupt our episode 0 for such a terrible this is a national crisis. It was definitely a national crisis. So thank you, everyone, for understanding that. Kevin, thanks again.
Thanks, Rod.
This was Military Matters. This episode is written and produced by Rod Rodriguez, executive produced by Joe Fleming. Go to stripes.com, use promo code podcast, and get 50% off your digital subscription. That's 50% off your digital subscription. Go to stripes.com, use promo code podcast. Make a plan to do away with high-interest credit card debt by transferring your balance to a Navy Federal credit card. With a low intro APR and no balance transfer fees, you can pick the right card to help you save more. 5.99 to 18% variable APRs based on product types and credit worthiness, up to $1 cash advance transaction fees at non-Navy Federal ATMs. Check out NavyFederal.org for more information. I'm Rod Rodriguez, and I'll see you at the next episode.